Hey everyone! Welcome to The Young and the Restless. I'm Jane, and I'm so excited to have you here. If you love Young and the Restless, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Alright, let's dive right in. The Young and the Restless spoilers for Friday, July 18th, state that Audra Charles and Kyle Abbott will surrender, while Sharon Newman responds to some worrisome news. Jack Abbott will also make a daring move against Billy Abbott, so this is what fans may expect. Billy is failing to maintain his end of the bargain because he is preoccupied with Chancellor and is not giving Abbott Communications the attention it deserves. Jack promised a significant investment to support Billy's new enterprise, but his brother isn't following through. That's why Jack will feel compelled to punish Billy in Friday's YNR episode. Jack is poised to make a daring move, therefore he may withdraw his financing or even attempt to take over the company. Sally Spectra forged her own bargain with Billy, but it could break apart depending on what Jack does next. Sharon will receive some worrisome updates about Nick Newman and the frame-up situation he is facing. Sharon will conclude there must be something she can do to aid Nick, so she will find a way to take charge in Friday's episode. Next, let's talk about Kyle and Audra, who have been getting too close for comfort on this vacation. Audra and Kyle believe they have everything under control, but that control is about to slip away from them. Kyle and Audra have been treating this as a flirtatious game, but things are going to turn serious between them. The attraction that has been growing may eventually boil over, and these former flames may kiss or even get into bed together. Will Audra and Kyle learn about Damian Kane's murder before passion flares? If this is the case, Kyle may be able to console Audra as she worries about Amy Lewis and Nate Hastings' future anguish. Audra's softer side may emerge, increasing Kyle's attraction to her, so bear that in mind. Perhaps the Damian stunner will wait till Kyle and Audra enter passionate area. It could be a strategy to make Audra and Kyle feel even worse after betraying Nate and Claire Newman. Whatever the case, The Young and the Restless spoilers indicate that the week will end with some intriguing cliffhanger moments, so stay tuned. Nick's indignation was evident as he raced into the room, his eyes flaming with rage as they fixed on Kane, who stood near the fireplace, his face a mix of defiance and guilt. The tension between them crackled like a live wire, the air heavy with unspoken accusations and the weight of treachery. Nick had always thought of Kane as a friend, a confidant, and someone he could trust, but now, confronted with the incontrovertible fact of planted evidence, that trust had been broken into a million irreparable pieces. "How could you?" Nick demanded, his voice quivering with rage. "After everything we've been through, you'd stoop this low? Planting evidence to frame me? What the hell were you thinking?" Kane's jaw tightened, but he didn't instantly reject the claim, escalating Nick's rage. The stillness between them was stifling, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel, each second extending into an eternity as Nick waited for an explanation, which he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. Meanwhile, Lily remained at the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her gaze shifting between the two men with a mix of distrust and sadness. She had always been observant, able to read people in ways few others could, and her instincts were warning her that something was seriously wrong. The contrived evidence was not just a betrayal of Nick, but also of her, their family, and everything they had achieved together. But her thoughts were going in another way, one she had been trying to conceal for years. Her ex-husband's name lingered in her mind like a haunting chant, a ghost from her past that refused to be forgotten. The more she thought about it, the more the pieces fit together, the timing, the reason, and the sheer cruelty of it all. This couldn't be a coincidence. Lily's fingers clenched around her elbows as she finally spoke, her tone low but steady. "This isn't just about you two," she explained, her gaze hardening. "Someone else is pulling the strings here, and I believe I know who it is." Nick and Kane both turned to her, their disagreement temporarily forgotten as they recognized the severity of her statement. As Nick followed her train of thinking, his wrath turned to confusion, and then to dawning comprehension. "You don't mean..." He stopped off, refusing to pronounce the name aloud. Lily nodded grimly. My ex-husband. He's always been manipulative, always playing the long game. If anyone would go this far to destroy us, it's him. The mention of Lily's ex, a man with a reputation for cunning and cruelty, made the room feel colder. Nick's thoughts raced as he attempted to absorb the notion. He had never trusted the man, sensing something dark beneath the attractive exterior, but he had not expected this level of deceit. But why now? Nick wondered, more to himself than to the others. What does he stand to gain by framing me? Lily laughed bitterly. Power. Control. Revenge. Take your pick. He's never gotten over the fact that I left him, that I moved on with my life. And if he can't have me, he'll settle for destroying everything and everyone I care about. Kane, who had been unusually quiet, eventually spoke out, his voice strained. If that's true, we're all in danger. He won't stop here. The seriousness of the situation enveloped them like a smothering blanket. This was no longer simply a personal vengeance, it was a full-fledged battle that could devastate their lives if they didn't act quickly. Nick's earlier indignation had subsided into something more dangerous, steely determination. Then we fight back, he declared, his voice steely. We expose him for what he is. We don't let him win. Lily nodded in agreement, but her eyes were filled with concern. She knew her ex-husband better than anybody else, and she understood how far he was willing to go. This was not going to be simple. We need proof, she explained. Solid, irrefutable evidence that links him to the planted evidence. Otherwise, it's just our word against his, and he's always been better at playing the victim. Kane raked a hand through his hair, exasperation visible in his every movement. So where do we even start? If he's behind this, he's covered his tracks well. Nick's mind was already working, pulling together bits of knowledge and looking for a weak point in their adversary's armor. We start with the evidence itself, according to him. There has to be a trail, a mistake he made, something that leads back to him. No one's perfect, not even him. Lily's lips squeezed into a thin line as she examined the concept. And if we find it? She inquired. Nick's expression stiffened. Then we make sure he pays for what he's done. No more games. No more running. This ends now. The determination in his voice was palpable, and for the first time since the tragedy began, Lily felt a glimmer of optimism. They faced a daunting opponent, but they were not alone. Together, they had a chance. Kane straightened his shoulders as he sensed a shift in the environment. I'll help, he promised, his tone sincere. I may have messed up, but I'm not going to let him destroy everything. I owe you both that much. Nick eyed him for a long time before nodding curtly. The treachery still stings, but they needed all of their pals right now. As the three of them began to devise a strategy, the enormity of the task loomed huge. The journey to expose Lily's ex-husband would be plagued with peril, deception, and heartbreak. However, they had no choice. The fabricated evidence was only the beginning, the first move in a lethal game. And if they don't act swiftly, they may not have another chance to turn the tables. The stakes had never been higher, and as the night progressed, the distinctions between friend and adversary, truth and lie, were blurred. One thing was certain, things will never be the same again. The hours passed in a blur of whispered chats, hasty research, and anxious silences. Every path they followed seemed to lead to another dead end, and every clue was a red herring intended to mislead. However, they refused to give up. Lily's ex-husband had underestimated them, believing they would break under strain. He was about to discover how incorrect he was. By the time the first rays of dawn broke through the windows, they had a plan, a hazardous, desperate attempt, but a plan nonetheless. Nick's jaw was set with purpose, Lily's eyes burned with suppressed rage, and even Kane appeared re-energized, his previous remorse transformed into a ferocious resolution. They were ready. The battle lines had been drawn, and this time they were not going to back down. As they stepped out into the thin morning light, the weight of what was ahead fell on them. The fight for the truth, justice, and their very lives had only just begun. And no matter what it took, they would persevere. Nick's fingers clenched at his sides, his thoughts repeating the events of the previous few days, the betrayal, the accusations, and the sheer audacity of their adversary's plan. But underlying the rage was something else, a cold, unwavering confidence that they would win. Lily went beside him, her mind whirling with fear and determination. She had spent years attempting to escape her past, to start a new life free of her ex-husband's influence. Those shadows had caught up with her, threatening to engulf everything she cared about. But she refused to let that happen. Not without a struggle. Kane took up the rear, his customary confidence dampened by the gravity of the occasion. He had committed major mistakes, but here was his chance to make things right. And he meant to seize it. The three of them marched on together, united by one goal, to bring down the guy who had arranged their collapse. The path ahead would be perilous, with an unclear outcome. But one thing was clear, they were done following his rules. It was time to turn the tables. And they refused to stop until justice was served. Audra and Kyle had agonized over their decision for weeks, their minds clouded with anxiety and confusion as they considered the repercussions of their next step. The weight of their secret had become terrible, nagging at them day and night until they could no longer avoid the inevitable, they had to give in. The authorities were closing in, their inquiry tightening like a noose over their necks, and each passing moment felt like borrowed time. Audra, normally the calmer of the two, found herself trembling at the least sound, her nerves strained beyond repair. Kyle, despite his outward stoicism, had heavy circles under his eyes, a result of the restless hours spent rehearsing their mistakes in his mind. They knew they couldn't escape indefinitely, but the prospect of facing the consequences was paralyzing. The morning they eventually called their lawyer, their voices barely above a whisper, was both a relief and a nightmare, a step toward resolution, but also the start of a new type of torture. Their lawyer, a seasoned professional with a reputation for handling high-stakes cases, had been cautiously optimistic, telling them that the process would be difficult but assuring them that cooperation could result in some leniency. Still, the phrase leniency rang hollow as the reality of incarceration loomed over them. Audra's hands shook as she packed a tiny suitcase with supplies for their surrender, her mind racing with anticipation of what lay ahead. Will they be separated? Would the media get wind of their surrender and make their life a spectacle? Kyle, however, walked mechanically, his typical confidence replaced by a bleak determination to survive whatever came next. The trip to the police station was hushed, the air thick with whispered regrets and the crushing weight of their actions. Audra gazed out the window, watching the world go by as if it were a distant memory, already feeling like an outsider looking in. Kyle focused on the road, his grip on the driving wheel so firm that his knuckles turned white. When they finally pulled into the parking lot, neither of them moved at first, the gravity of the situation settling over them like a smothering blanket. Audra finally took a deep breath and opened the car door, her legs shaky as she walked out onto the pavement. Kyle followed, his mouth clenched, his customary confidence replaced by a somber resignation. The walk into the station felt like the longest of their lives, with each step laden with the realization that there was no going back. The cops inside were expecting them, and their emotions were unreadable as they led Audra and Kyle through the process. Fingerprints, pictures, and the cold metal of handcuffs snapping around their wrists, each step was a harsh reminder of the life they were leaving behind. Audra held back tears, her pride unwilling to allow her cry in front of strangers, but the truth of their predicament was unavoidable. Kyle, ever the guardian, gave her a reassuring look, but the tightness in his grin revealed his own anxiety. The interrogation that followed was difficult, with the investigators probing for details and asking sharp and unrelenting questions. Audra and Kyle kept to their narrative, their lawyer's counsel echoing in their ears, but the weight of their guilt was palpable, covering the room like a dense cloud. By the time they were processed and placed in separate holding cells, weariness had set in, the emotional toll of the day leaving them depleted and hollow. Audra sat on the short bench, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the sterile walls as the reality of her new life set in. Kyle, in his own cell, paced like a caged animal, his mind racing with anticipation of what would happen next. Will they be given bail? Will the people ever forgive them? The uncertainty was almost as bad as the capitulation itself. Meanwhile, Sharon sat in her living room, phone in hand, face pale as she listened to the news. The anchor's voice was calm and objective as they described Audra and Kyle's capitulation, but Sharon felt as if the world was collapsing around her. She had anticipated and dreading this day for months, but hearing it confirmed was a blow she was unprepared for. Her hands trembled as she read over the headlines, each one more damning than the next. Audra and Kyle surrender, facing multiple charges, the fall of a power couple, is justice finally served? The words blurred together, her eyes filled with unshed tears. How had things gotten to this? She had cautioned them, asked them to reconsider their behavior, but they were so confident in themselves, so convinced they were untouchable. The implications were now unavoidable. Sharon's mind was racing with questions. What would happen to them next? Will they blame her for not stopping them? Will she get sucked into the situation as well? The thought drove a new rush of panic through her, and her breath came in short, uneven gasps. She stood abruptly, desperate to move, to do something, anything, to distract herself from the torrent of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. However, the house felt too small, with walls closing in on her as the weight of the situation pressed down. She grabbed her car keys, her motions frenetic, and dashed outdoors, the cool air doing little to soothe her racing mind. As she drove aimlessly, her thoughts kept returning to Audra and Kyle, the last time she saw them. They had been so cocky, so convinced they could outwit everyone, but now they were facing the doom they had dismissed as inconceivable. Sharon's hands curled over the wheel, her knuckles white with anxiety. She should have done more, pushed harder to persuade them to see reason. However, it was too late now. The damage was done, all that remained was to pick up the pieces. Her phone buzzed in the passenger seat, and a notice appeared on the screen, presumably another news update. She couldn't bring herself to look, the thought of what she could see was too much to bear. Instead, she concentrated on the road ahead, her mind a swirl of regret, dread, and powerlessness. The sun had fallen by the time she arrived home, and the gloom outside mirrored her inner struggle. She collapsed onto the couch, her vitality depleted, the events of the day washing over her like a tsunami. Audra and Kyle were in detention, their futures uncertain, and she was left to deal with the consequences. The news would only get worse from here, with increased scrutiny and harsher sentences. Sharon knew she needed to ready herself for what was to come, but all she felt was deep regret for the lives that had been irrevocably changed. The phone rang, jolting her out of her thoughts. She hesitated before responding, her voice barely audible as she murmured hello. The person on the other line was recognizable, but the words they said drove a new wave of anxiety through her. It was merely the beginning, and the path ahead was darker than she had imagined. Audra and Kyle's surrender was only the first domino to fall, and Sharon was directly in the line of the cascade. The disturbing news she had gotten was simply the beginning, there was no predicting where it would lead.